David is one of the nation's leading anti-war activists, impeachment accountability activists. He's a writer, he's a blogger. If you've ever been on Common Dreams or Truth Out or Opted News or Democrats.com or PDA or any of the other great blogs out there and websites, you're going to see David's writings. He's the former communications director for Dennis Kucinich's campaign in 2004. He was the former communications director for the International Labor Communications Association. Did I get that right? All right. He was also the, for I think 3 years, he worked for the media coordinator for ACORN, for Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now. Is that right?
Is he a community activist?
He's a community activist. He's the co-founder, along with Tim Carpenter and others, of AfterDowningStreet.org, one of my favorite websites. And if you haven't gone to AfterDowningStreet.org, it's a treat. You need to do that. Okay, if there's anybody in the room that hasn't done that, please go to AfterDowningStreet.org. He's currently the Washington director for Democrats.com, and he's on the advisory board of PDA. So, John Nichols of The Nation put David in the same category as the rebel Tom Paine. Maybe it's because David's writings make a lot of common sense. So with that said, let me introduce our rebel, David Swanson.
I'm on a 50-city book tour, and I'm at about 45, 46 cities. So I'm in the final stretch, and I don't think I've seen a better room of activists than this one right here.
All right.
I don't think I've been in a hall or a church or a room where there were fewer people who were sober for my. So I'm gonna try to. I was going to try to be brief. Dan told me not to be too brief, so blame him. But, I've got to take questions and answers at the end if there's anything that hasn't been heckled and shouted at that point. But thank you to Dan and Sharon and PDA, which is one of the best groups there is, and Code Pink and Women in Black, of course. And Liz, who I fully expect to protest my speech before it's over. And we had a guy named George W. Bush come to my town, Charlottesville, Virginia, and speak at Thomas Jefferson. I can see Thomas Jefferson's house from my house, and George W. Bush comes and speaks at Thomas Jefferson's house. And the real radicals won't protest him because somebody might think they're defending the honor of a slave owner. But most of the liberals and the activists and the serious citizens in our town wouldn't dare protest George W. Bush, but the Code Pink folks and Liz came to town, and we said we're going to do it, and every couple minutes while Bush was speaking in front of Jefferson's house, somebody stood up in a chair and told him exactly what we thought of him, and ran up to him with a banner. We hadn't evolved to the shoe throwing, but we were all handcuffed and given a ride down the mountain and told to get out of there. And John Yu's coming to speak at the University of Virginia Law School. How many people think Liz should come? Yesterday I was in LA, and there's a congresswoman from LA by the name of Jane Harman. Jane Harman
makes the most money in Congress. She has the most money. Look it up.
Jane Harman is a Democrat with a large D, not a small d, and she has never seen a war she didn't like, never seen a crime she didn't excuse if it was by somebody important, and she was involved in conspiring with the agents of the government of Israel against her own government, and they spied on her without a warrant and Did she get upset and go public and say, you're not supposed to be spying on Congress members without a warrant? This might explain half the actions of my colleagues in Congress for the past couple of years. No. She said, oh, okay, blackmail me. You want me to go to the New York Times and pressure them not to put out this story about warrantless spying until Bush can get a second term and do more damage for 4 more years? Okay, I'm with you. And then when the New York Times finally, post-election, puts out the story about the warrantless spying because the reporter was fed up and about to publish it the next day in a book, is Jane Harman upset? She's upset at the whistleblowers and at the New York Times. Right? This is who Jane Harman is. Well, in Congress, we supposedly have something that we can work with called the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Right? And you think caucus, you think a group of members who stand for stuff and do things in Congress. Right? And there are caucuses like that. You know, the Blue Dog Caucus. Right? You know, the Blue Dog Caucus will say, we will vote no on this bill unless it's made worse in the following 4 ways. And then they will make it worse in those ways, and then they'll vote yes on the bill. And everybody takes them seriously. Everybody meets with them. Everybody negotiates with them. They're something you could call a caucus. Now, they're about half the size of the Progressive Caucus, but the Progressive Caucus is just resume padding. There's no requirements to be in it. There's no duties required of you for being in it. Never, ever, ever in the history of the galaxy has ever done anything. It's just said things, right? A couple years ago, they got 90 Congress members to say we won't vote for war money. And they all voted for war money. A couple of exceptions, as you could expect. Often there will be a few exceptions. Once they're sure the thing will pass, they'll let a few people vote no so they can brag. Even Pelosi herself will vote no after she makes sure it passes. Last June, they got 57 members of the Progressive Caucus and some allies to sign a letter to Pelosi saying, we won't support a health care bill unless it meets these minimum requirements. And it didn't. And out of those 57, 55 voted yes anyway. Right? This is the Progressive Caucus. And it's long been chaired by 2 women from California, Lynn Woolsey and Barbara Lee. Now it's chaired by Lynn Woolsey and Raul Grijalva. Raul Grijalva, who also has not done a goddamn thing.
But he has potential.
And we all have potential, Liz. You have potential.
That's why they gave Obama the Peace Prize. Here's potential to establish peace.
So this is a story of Lynn Woolsey. She's a co-chair of the Progressive Caucus for years. Never once does anything, just says things. And she votes better than almost anybody in Congress, better than Raul. She other than Dennis Kucinich, she votes just about better than anybody else. When it won't have any effect. When a bad bill is going to pass, she'll vote no. When a good bill is going to fail, she'll vote yes. And she has a better voting record than anybody else. And that's it. That's almost all she does, is vote better and talk better. And never ever does anything. If Liz were in Congress, she would vote the right way. She would publicly demand that her colleagues vote the right way. She would publicly insist that the leadership vote the right way. She would vote no on the procedural votes before you get to the policy votes. She would fight for a position we want, right? Anybody in this room, if you were in Congress, you wouldn't just put up a pretense and make sure you were voting the best way you could that was okay with Nancy or Ron. You would actually fight for things, right? Well, that's not Lynn Woolsey. That's not just about anybody. I mean, Dennis Kucinich is an exception. And you have in Los Angeles a leader of Progressive Democrats of America and other activist efforts for years who would be that kind of congressmember, who almost won a primary last time against Jane Harman and is running again. So what? And her name is Marcy Winograd. Marcy Winograd will be the leader of the majority of Americans' viewpoint versus corporate America's viewpoint in the 112th Congress. She will be. And what does Lynn Woolsey do? Yesterday in Los Angeles, she comes down to raise money for Jane Harman. Now, if you want to pretend you're running something called the Progressive Caucus, and that it's going to be a caucus and do something, and maybe now with the potential of Raul Grijalva, it's going to actually do something. Although both Raul Grijalva and Lynn Wolsey are out there now campaigning for this lousy, worse than nothing health care bill. In the case of Raul Grijalva, constantly saying, God, it's such an awful bill, but I'm going to vote for it. Don't worry, I'm going to vote for it. I wish it didn't suck quite so bad. I'm going to vote for it. That is not action. That's talk. And it is better talk, but it's only talk. And talk is cheap. And from Jane Hartman, you don't even get talk. And every bill that Lynn Wolsey ever votes the right way on, Jane Hartman votes the wrong way on. Right? So she's canceling herself out to go and campaign for Jane Hartman. So the wise and energized people of Los Angeles showed up and blocked off the entrance and protested. And here comes Lynn Wolsey. And here are all the people who usually support her and cheer for her, and still cheer for her when she does the right thing. You know, these people are not all good or all bad. You cheer for them when they do the right thing. You punish them when they do the wrong thing. Well, here she comes, and she won't take her eyes off the ground. And she won't look at anybody. And she looks like somebody who's just been convicted of some very embarrassing crime, and she's being paraded in front of the cameras. And she's looking at the ground, and she walks by my friend Ray McGovern, who gave me an account of this, because I was in Los Angeles but not at this thing. And he says to her as she goes by, Lynn, we're very disappointed in you. And she won't look up. And she just keeps walking, and she makes it to the door. And she goes, yeah, I made it. You know, I got through, you dangerous, non-violent riffraff. And she goes in to raise money for Jane Hartman, right? The idea of having a progressive caucus is the right one, but we have to actually have one. And I would take one with 8 people in it that did stuff, rather than one with 85 that never, ever, ever does anything. So we have to start building that thing. I actually spoke in 2 different towns around Los Angeles yesterday, and the first event was hardcore party loyalists. It was a Democratic Party club. Everybody was in the local committees. Half the people in the room were running for local office. And so it was, the tendency was party first. You know. And then I spoke in another town in the evening where a lot of people in the room had made their mission in life destroying the Democratic Party. Right? They'd been fooled, and they'd recovered, and they were on to them, and that party was evil, and they were going to destroy it. And, you know, and I didn't quite agree with either group, but I had to talk to both of them. And both of them, everybody, in both rooms, and a lot of people not in either room, wanted everything the same from the government. Right? Wanted peace, wanted justice, wanted to demilitarize, put the money into useful human needs, defend civil rights, have a good foreign policy, all the same stuff. But they have very, very different ideas of how to go about it, right? And you can't give a really simple answer, because the system is so corrupt that you can't always say simply vote for the best candidate, no matter what, regardless of party. But what you can say is, for God's sake, stop obsessing every minute of your lives with elections, which ought to take up about 3% of our attention as citizen activists. Election, you know, Emma Goldman had it right.
Hey.
Yeah. You know what Emma Goldman said about voting?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's see.
You remember, but I have forgotten.
Sooner or later, the American people are going to wake up.
No, she said if voting worked, it would be illegal.
Yes.
See,
You know, it's not that you can do without voting. It's not that we can get rid of voting. It's not that it's good to have lots of people vote. And it's not that electoral challenges aren't one of our tools for influencing people in between elections. But voting by itself has never done anything, never changed a thing. Most of what we do and most of what people have ever done that did any good began after elections and happened in between elections. You know, and because we're not automatically registered the way we are to kill and die and have Social Security, we think of registering people to vote as activism. It's busy work. It's not activism. Activism is after an election. To elect somebody and then say, oh, I'm going to sit around and see what you do, is to treat them as a dictator. It's a very disrespectful, inappropriate thing to do. When you elect somebody, you make a deal, where your part is to tell them how to represent you. You know? So we have this theory that our role is to be voters. And that's the big thing we do, is we vote and stuff related to voting, right? And when we take a fancy to it, we convince ourselves that for the first time in the history of the world, we're going to vote for somebody who's going to keep all their promises. And for the first time in the history even of fictional literature, we're going to elect somebody who's going to keep all kinds of promises he's not even making. Right? Not unheard of. Phenomenal. Right? We're going to elect somebody who's going to do all the stuff we just imagine they're going to do. Right? And then, when it doesn't happen, God, the disappointment. Oh, how could that have gone wrong? The discouragement. Right? When it's absolutely irrelevant. It has nothing to do with changing what our government does, who lives, who dies, whether we destroy the planet. It has nothing to do with who's the star of the national soap opera, who we voted off the island, and who we kept on, and what school their daughters go to, and what kind of dog they have. It has nothing to do with nothing. It's a complete distraction, right? It's imperialistic. It's presidentialism at the loss of engagement with our government. When Bush was in the White House, we protested him. We had a lot of fun protesting him. Did we ever imagine we could lobby him and persuade him of things? When was the last time anybody lobbied a president and persuaded them of something? Especially to go against the entire military machine that at this point publicly tells the president what to do. You know? And how easy is it to go after senators and make them represent their constituents? The House of Representatives is the low-hanging fruit in our federal government. Now, there are lots of other useful things to do in terms of media work and education and counter-recruitment and local and state projects, but if you're going after the federal government and trying to get representation, you know, do yourselves a favor and try a thought experiment and go a week without thinking about the president, for God's sake. And think about your representative in the House and the one you want to replace your representative in the House. If somebody like Rebecca can get a good level of support without any organizational backing and support from inside the government, you know, imagine what she can get if people get behind her, and if people around the nation get behind her. And, you know, and then even if she doesn't win, then you don't do the stupid thing and say, oh, well, she obviously can't win. Then you get more the next time and more the next time until she wins. Right? You can't have this kind of attention span where it has to be this year or this week or this hour. You have to keep pushing. And Rebecca is a campaign to work for. Marcy Winogreds as well is a campaign to work for that PDA is doing phone banking nationally, where you can help her from here, and you can give her money and give Rebecca money from here. The thing about members of the House and going after them is to not just lobby them, as I know that you all do, but to go after them with the media. You've got to build good, independent media outlets and stop trying to work with the bad ones. You know, the next peace group that buys a full-page ad in the New York Times needs to be sent hunting with Cheney. Stop it. Don't subscribe to it. Build up the good. You know, I've been on a show with Jeff Marias a lot of times, and you know, if he doesn't reach enough people, it's because we haven't built it into a big enough thing to reach enough people. You've got to go after their funders, because they do have sources of money And those people can be shamed. If Lynn Woolsey was one of us, she wouldn't be raising money for Jane Harmon. She would be shaming Jane Harmon's funders. And she would be demanding that Jane Harmon and her blackmailers be prosecuted for their crimes. Right? And Rebecca, with all due respect, of course, we've got to indict Bush now. We didn't do it, but we've got to do it now.
I would do it in a heartbeat, sir, if I was in Congress.
Yes. Well,
In a heartbeat.
Congress members, there are very useful things Congress members can do. And if we get you in there and we get some good members in there who are running on that platform, we'll get it done. We may even get it done sooner if enough challengers are running on that platform. But beyond those techniques, the absolutely critical one, I think, is direct action. Right? Here we are tomorrow, we're going to have Volunteer Day for Martin Luther King Jr. It makes about as much sense as sending George W. Bush to save Haiti.
That's right.
When are we going to have National Nonviolent Resistance Day for Martin Luther King Jr.?
Malcolm X then. That's what we need. Where do you suggest we go first?
It's well, I'll tell you some things I think we should do, and many of you are doing many of them. But you know, even going after the House members, you know, we're up against the money, we're up against the media, we're up against the party leadership. But there are a lot of things that help. One is just to realize and behave as if we're a majority. Because the televisions and the newspapers keep telling us that we're this fringe group. On all these issues, there's page after page in my book of polling information and documentation on civil rights, on human rights, on peace, on justice, on spending priorities. We are a strong majority. So you know, we do have to beware of the dangers of right-wing fringe groups that are threatening violence. We don't have to treat them as if they are a majority of our country, right? And we don't, when we have 80% with us, and we can't get any action out of Washington, we need more of those 80% to get active. We don't need to win over that last 20%. You know, you can't get below 20% on belief in UFOs. It's very hard to get below 20%. So where we are lagging, where we are a minority, is in terms of activism, right? In terms of the people who all agree with us doing enough. And a lot of you in this room are doing everything you can. So I can't ask you to do more except to get more other people doing it with you. PDA is going to hold vigils outside Congress members' offices this Wednesday, starting a campaign of third Wednesday every month, vigiling to say no more money for these wars. I strongly recommend that you take the vigil inside the office and just sit there. And as long as they still haven't passed this godforsaken health care bill, you cough a lot while you're sitting there. and you bring information with you. If you go to defundwar.org, which is part of afterdowningstreet.org, you find where every Congress member stands on funding wars, what promises they've made, what promises they've broken, what positions they've taken, and you'll find links to the cost in dollars, tax dollars, to your district of these wars. You'll find documentation of why you have to multiply that by 5 to get a realistic cost to the economy in your district. You'll find a cost in military contracts to your district. And if they tell you, yes, but we need the jobs, you know, the fact that there really are military jobs should not distract you from the fact that it is either military spending or jobs. It's a choice, and spending money on the military destroys jobs, because there is nothing that our government could do with that money that wouldn't produce more jobs than putting it in the military. Even the right-wing scheme of cutting taxes produces more jobs. But if you invest in education and green energy, putting solar panels on all the roofs, as Rebecca's going to do, and construction and any non-violent industry, you get more jobs than putting the money in the military. And that's domestically. That's not counting overseas and wars and foreign bases. Right? I'm sick and tired of watching NFL football games and having the guy come on, and it's almost the only sentence they say in grammatical English, but they say, "We welcome America's servicemen and women viewing the game in 177 countries around the world." What in the hell are we doing in 177 countries around the world for $140 billion a year in 865 acknowledged bases, almost certainly over 1,000 bases? That's our relationship with the 95% of our species that are not Americans, and we're making people hate us.
Making the wealthier wealthier.
And we're making,
Now we're
and we're
stealing the
making
resources
more
and
profiteers
sending
profit. There was a huge march here yesterday.
Yeah.
That's the kind of potential that this community and this country have. And those are people who don't want wars and militarism and don't want our rights stripped away. And the way they strip rights away is through wars and militarism. There's, in March, I know some folks in this room are coming to Washington, D.C. with Peace of the Action, P-E-A-C-E, Peace of the Action, to non-violently shut things down, to get in the way and block the doors and block the hallways and block the machines until they cannot so easily keep doing what the American people oppose. And, you know, it's not just...
What about in March? What's going on in Washington?
Everybody we know who we can persuade or pay passage is coming, and we are going to non-violently interfere with ordinary business.
On the anniversary of the war.
From March 13th, 2010, until hell freezes over, we are going to be in Washington, D.C. And you can get information at peaceoftheaction.org. And please, please come with us. But you know, it's not just that there's all this activism that we aren't told about. It's not just that thousands and thousands of people have gone and sacrificed their pensions and their savings and their family lives and their health to oppose these injustices. You know, when the president accepted that Nobel Peace Prize with that war-glorifying speech, and he began almost by saying, there's so many people more deserving. I know a couple hundred of them I can name right now, you know, because there is this activism, and it's not in the corporate media, but there's also successes that we're not told about. It's not just futile activism. It's not just activism that's moving opinion and building organizations for the future, but we're succeeding, and we're never told about the successes. You know, we have local and state and national and international victories all the time, and if we hear the stories at all, it's without the work that led up to it, right? Where no, Bush isn't going to put Obama's not going to put a base in the Czech Republic because he wants to kiss up to Russia. And they never tell you about the activism that forced the government of the Czech Republic to say, no, you can't put that base here, right? Who knows what the Army Experience Center is? Two wise people. You would know what it was pretty soon, if not for the activism of people on the other side of this country shutting it down. They put this theme park in a shopping mall in Pennsylvania with real weapons and real guns and video screens to show 13-year-olds how fun it is to kill Muslims, right? With Army recruiters hanging around to offer helpful gaming tips. And the resistance and the bad press and the picketing and the civil resistance and the people going to jail have hurt this thing so that it's not recruiting the people they thought it would recruit. And so they're not going to put them in shopping malls near you.
And do they say Muslims?
And what?
Do they say Muslims?
The military.
Well,
It's disgusting.
that's
Okay.
not on the Army brochures, but that's the
But they said terrorists, I'm sure, right?
Well, as we all know, terrorists means Muslims. But what happened is there was all kinds of pushback and activism, and it's ongoing, thank goodness. And the Army has started saying we probably aren't going to put these in more shopping malls, and we might even shut this one down. Because, of course, we aren't going to mention that there was any activism, because the economy is so lousy that recruitment's up. Well, The economy is lousy, recruitment is up, but they're dumping millions and millions of dollars into other recruitment techniques. Right? You can't go see a movie in the theater without the musical ad for the National Guard that they think people won't know means you're going to war. Well, and then you have activists who've been involved in this struggle, parroting the line from the Army saying, oh, well, they actually might shut it down because of the economy. Bullshit. We have to recognize the victories, see through the lies, and claim the victories, and tell the people in the other 49 states so they know. Because everybody's so victory dependent, and then but they don't know about all the victories. There was a huge rally in Maine a couple days ago at the state capitol with state legislators and leaders of constituency groups in Maine saying to Washington, no more money for the war. Big story in Maine. Nobody in the other 49 states knows about it. I just came down from San Diego where they've kept Blackwater out of San Diego.
Yeah!
And it's ongoing, they still want to come there, but when they decide where else they're going to go instead, they're going to go to a community that has no idea what San Diego did or that they want, because we aren't telling each other enough. I mean, that's what I try to use after Downing Street, and people use other websites and radio shows to do. That's what we have to do.